February 24th Legislative Affairs Committee meeting. In the absence of Vice President Walsh, I will be chairing this meeting. Present this evening, we have myself, President Zarella, Councillor Van Hazinga, and Councillor Kucher. And the sole item on the agenda is consideration of the Planning Board's recommendations for Phase 2, Bundle 3 of our zoning overhaul. And I would invite Tom Skrowski to present to us the portions of that bundle which were considered by the Economic Development Committee earlier this evening. You're muted, Tom.
Let's try this again. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Councillor Zarella. I just want to start things off with a quick kind of check for where we're at. Just, I guess, thumbs up. Anyone who was not part of the Economic Development Committee, I understand that many of you were listening in, so I want to know if I need to actually present all the information as given in the presentation, or should I cut right to the chase, so to speak?
If there's no objection, I would say cut right to the chase.
Okay. Excellent. So the first thing that was taken up by the Economic Development Committee was the multifamily development zoning, and the one few changes that were made. All of the changes proposed are on the left here. They haven't been reflected yet in the new document, with a few small exceptions, but all of these changes were approved by the Economic Development Committee. The most important one of substance that I would just add here, for every dwelling unit above 3 units, there shall be an increase in a minimum lot area over and above the minimum for the district, equal to 1/3 the lot area for the district. In districts with no minimum lot area, multifamily use under this section shall have a minimum lot area of 2,500 square feet per unit, including the first 3 units. And then it stated secondly, and this is really an important one, that multifamily developments of 9 or more dwelling units and residential uses by right on Main Street located above the first floor of the structure, the planning board may waive this density provision if determined that the grant of such waiver will not adversely affect the neighborhood and promotes the purpose of this section. So basically, anything less than between 4 and 8 units that is not on Main Street needs to conform to this criteria, or they need to seek a variance. If you're 9 or more dwelling units, or you're on Main Street, you can seek a waiver from the planning board.
So I do just want to comment. I know the Economic Development Committee decided to keep 181.745 in the ordinance.
Oh, thank you.
I just wanted to add that the reason I recommended pulling it out is because I agree with the intent to signal these criteria to developers and so forth, but if it's not going to be binding, then it shouldn't be in the law. However, since the consensus seems to be that it should be in the ordinance, I would recommend rewording it. I don't have specific wording in mind off the top of my head, but rewording it to direct the planning board to consider those criteria, which then makes it a proper object of legislation, rather than just sort of a heads up, these are things that would be nice notice. I think that really won't change the practical impact at all, but will clean it up legislation-wise. And I would make a motion that we request that the legal department rework that appropriately.
I'll second that. I think that's a reasonable compromise between the two intents.
Thank you, Councillor. If there is no objection, I mean, we're only 3, so I'm just going to count on whoever is not seconding a motion to speak up if they have an objection. Otherwise, I am going to assume unanimous consent. So we will pass that by unanimous consent. And otherwise, if there are no comments from the committee, I would ask unanimous consent to approve the changes recommended by the Economic Development Committee.
Second.
All right, and we will move right along.
Excellent. The next section was signage, and there was a series of recommendations from Councilor Zarella. All of them were approved with one exception, 181.5355 Section D, which I'll go to it in the ordinance. You can also see it here.
I think you may have your screen share paused.
Oh, thank you for catching that. So this is how it reads today. The maximum size for any one pennant, banner, or feather flag is 20 square feet. No more than one pennant, banner, or feather flag may be displayed at any one time along or facing each street frontage abutting the parcel of land on which the establishment is located, provided, however, that multiple banners, pennants, or feather flags may be displayed for each 50 feet of street frontage under single ownership. And the recommendation was that it's changed to no pennant, banner, or feather flag may be displayed at any one time along or facing any one 50-foot length or less of street frontage area abutting the parcel of land on which the establishment is located. I think there was, yes.
Yeah, just really quickly, that recommendation, the recommended language does contain a typographical error on my part. It is meant to say no more than one pennant, banner, or feather flag. Sorry, and you were about to make a comment on that.
So then I guess to summarize, you're not really making any substantive change here. It's just you're adjusting the sentence structure.
Yes, that the intent was to make it clearer, because as currently worded, it seems to say you can't do this except actually you can. Whereas if it's the intent was to make it clear that for every 50 feet, you can have one. And the reason it's worded as any 150-foot length rather than every 50 feet is to make it clear that it is a rolling limitation, not a segmented limitation. In other words, you can't have a 50-foot stretch with a pennant at one end and then another pennant 2 feet away in the second 50-foot stretch. You would have to have the pennants at least 50 feet away from one another.
Make a motion to approve this change.
All right, and I will second that. So if there is no objection, then we are approving that change. And then if there are no further comments, I would move that we approve the recommendations of the Economic Development Committee on all other changes.
Second.
Seeing no objection, they are approved. I did have a couple comments on the sign issues, actually. The plaque change that I had recommended, this was, yeah, I see Tom is scrolling to it. No, up, this would
item
be,
number 3.
Yeah, item number 3.
Okay, right.
One is I threw this together this afternoon. It occurred to me 3 square feet is larger than I was thinking it was. I'm thinking more like maybe 1.5 feet square. I was trying to, I'm bad at estimating numbers, to be honest. So I'm thinking, a plaque, not a big, sign on a wall.
If I may, I believe Mr. O'Hara had the specific size of the historical commission plaques that we could use as a template?
I believe he said it was 11 by 16.
Okay.
So that's what had me thinking about 1.5 feet would be more appropriate. And the other thing I wanted to ask about that is, do we think we should have that under residential exceptions only, or should we allow that kind of a plaque on non-residential buildings as well, where appropriate? Councilor Van Housinga?
I think non-residential buildings are fine. You are correct that the ordinance as written does limit it appears to residential, I believe. So, but I think there are buildings of historical significance that are commercial buildings.
Okay, so in that case, in addition to the change in the square footage, I would also move that we make that entire paragraph. No, the one below that, Tom.
Oh, sorry.
That we make that entire paragraph a separate section within 533 rather than a sub part of 5331.
Okay. And you're also recommending the change to 1.5 square feet?
Yes.
And that would include non-residential properties.
Yes.
Okay.
And do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. If there is no objection, we will make that change. And the only other thing I wanted to mention about signs is I remember there was some discussion in economic development about the planter signs. Do we actually have any of those that are not on public property? Is that a common thing that's not on public property? Because otherwise I think we could just, it would fall under 5332 and we don't need a separate exemption for them.
Governmental signs.
Right.
I think it's a very good point.
Now, I guess it's not, many of them are not maintained by the city. And that's sort of denoted in the signs where it's, Rotary Club or the like. I guess it's sort of, maybe in practice, they're not maintained, but it's still a city sanctioned event is what I would say.
Right, and I see a comment from Councillor Squalia that there are planter signs at the Knights of Columbus. Okay, so yeah, we'll probably want to craft some kind of exemption for that, but I don't think it needs to be very broad because, and I very much second the comment that Councillor Van Housinga made at the previous meeting, that we need to be very careful about how we draft that because anyone can put a planter outside and we don't want anyone to be able to put a sign on their planter and circumvent our usual sign regulations in that manner. But I do agree that there can be some kind of exemption for that. Otherwise, if no one has anything to add, then I'm fine with moving on.
Second.
Yeah, I don't think we actually need a motion just to move on to the next section, but
all right.
Oh, you're making a motion on second on the comment. Okay, yeah. Then by unanimous consent, we will suggest that the legal department and the community development office draft something up on that.
Okay.
All right.
You ready to move on now past signage?
All set, unless anyone else has anything.
Earth removal is next, and a lot of documents up on my screen, so I appreciate everyone's patience. So all of the changes proposed in this section are covered here, and all of them were accepted. I think one thing just worth noting, in additional considerations, We are going to be numbering and reformatting when this is agreed to in concept and it actually goes to a formal ordinance vote. Number 2, 373 and 374, DPW engineering had proposed some changes that are called out in 3732 and 3733, as well as 3721. And it's worth noting, they also mentioned that as a consideration, we should think about, is there any way we can, I guess, ensure that any large truck travel that might damage city infrastructure, there's a way to recoup that damage in essence. But Nick Erickson, our assistant city engineer who proposed these changes, wasn't quite sure exactly how to swing that from a zoning perspective, but it was a consideration and a concern that he posed. And then the last item, we didn't discuss in detail the need to better differentiate between earth removal as an enterprise and earth removal as incidental to another use. And I guess, what about excavation necessary for the construction of roadways, retention ponds, and other infrastructure? Councilor Van Hazinga, did we discuss that in economic development? I don't recall we did.
We talked about it a little bit, but not in great detail. We didn't come to any consensus, I believe. I think it was just the goal of this ordinance, or this section of the ordinance. And it's something that we are open to strengthening a little bit if there's that opportunity as we move along.
Yeah, the idea that Councilor Van Hazinga and I discussed this afternoon is that it's clear how this applies to earth removal operations that are sort of standalone, whether it's, quarrying or, serious regrading or whatever. And it's clear that run-of-the-mill project-related earth removal is exempted under the definition. But there's some gray area in between, like if someone wanted to do a building with a multi-level basement, that would constitute more than 150% of the volume of the first floor, but it also would not be sort of a principal use of earth removal like we have in the table. Or again, the example that Councilor Van Hazinga inserted was retention ponds, also not related to driveways or building construction, but not earth removal for its own sake either. Another concern that I had was, what if someone's doing large scale re-landscaping to the point where the earth is not in fact being removed, but moved from one part of a property to another? Would we want oversight on that to make sure that there's not, stormwater issues and so on? Also including adding earth rather than removing. If you're trucking 2 tons of dirt onto a property, as currently worded, this doesn't give us any additional oversight into that. These are not things that I have any suggested wording for or provisions. Just something that I think either in this round or in a future earth removal specific amendment, we may want to look into. But I don't have any objection to passing this as is and making changes going forward. I don't think there's anything detrimental in the current wording that can't be fixed prospectively. So, does anyone else have any comment? Seeing none. Oh, I see a comment from Mr. O'Hara. Disturbance of greater than 20,000 square feet would trigger a sedimentation and erosion control plan to DPW, which is outside the zoning ordinance. Okay, that's good to know. I think we may wish to incorporate by reference that ordinance provision or statutory provision in the earthworks removal provision.
It actually
And-
is.
Okay, is it?
So right here.
Okay, gotcha. And I see Ms. Karen also says land clearing and fill could be addressed in separate ordinance updates. I agree. And Framingham has examples. I agree. I think it's something I'd like to look at going forward. But unless anyone thinks otherwise, I don't see it as an obstacle to moving ahead on the existing proposal. All right, seeing no objection, I would move that we accept all of the recommendations as currently presented
A second.
and move on. And I have a second, so unless there is objection, that is by unanimous consent.
Fine.
Moving on.
So the last item that was looked at was the expansion of the site plan review capabilities of the planning board. One of the sort of unique characteristics that differentiates the planning board from the ZBA is that it does have this site plan review capability that, and they're very well versed in reviewing engineered site plans to make recommendations for a variety of uses. So there were a couple
You're
things.
paused again, just so you know.
Yeah, thank you. They added 3-family structures, non-exempt container farming, lumber yards, salvage yards, earth removal, timber harvesting, drive-through facilities, and then have sort of a catch-all at the end where site plan review is called out in the ordinance, but it's not here, it would still apply. And then, there was the one request for amendment in Economic Development Committee, and that was to strike municipal from 181 9511 and 9512, and that was voted down on grounds that there are a number of important municipal projects that have been approved through site plan review, and the thought was that those projects had improved through that site plan review process, and it allows for an open and transparent way for the general public to see how projects are reviewed on a municipal basis.
And I would agree with the idea that the site plan review on municipal projects has improved projects in the past. But as a separation of powers issue, I would like to see it addressed by giving the planning board the authority to issue advisory review at the request of the city. But to make it clear that the planning board has no power. Again, I've said this a bunch of times throughout this process. This is not a concern I have about the existing planning board. This is simply a concern about the planning board as an institution, when it may contain people in the future who I don't know and have no, basis on which to trust. I think the reason I would like to see those terms struck from the mandatory provision here is to make it clear that the planning board has no authority to deny a city project. To specifically say that the city may not move forward on a given basis, or that the city must meet certain criteria set by the board before it can go forward. I feel that that's not the role of a municipal board, to overrule the elected city government on a city project. But I don't see any problem with continuing to have site plan review on an advisory basis.
And Councilor Zarella, I believe what you're stating is actually accommodated under our city code as it exists, just for what it's worth. I mean, in Article 8, Section 3, 140, any location or layout of any new public highway, public building, it it shall submit the same to the planning board for its report and recommendation, and the board shall file its report to the city council. And if it fails to do so, the council may proceed to final action without reference to the report of the planning board. So it is referenced here for what it's worth. It's not referenced insofar as a site plan review, which does, for what it's worth, carry some sort of clear standards associated with it. So that's one thing that would be lost if we did this, but I just wanted to note that it is included in our code.
Right. And I see that certainly as far as that section is worded, it does appear that that if the report is submitted to the council has an obligation to reference it, but not necessarily to follow it. I'm just concerned with the way that the current ordinance under review is worded. It does make it mandatory. I see Ms. Karen is saying site plan cannot deny a use, but if I'm not mistaken, it can put conditions on a project. Am I correct?
Yet you can place conditions. They must be significantly less onerous than what you would place in a special permit.
Right.
It's a fairly, I mean, anything. We have a number of uses that are allowed by right that we can have site plan review capabilities, but it's really adjustments at the margins. And to Chair Karen's point, I think some great changes were recommended. Reviewing the city hall site plans with regard to egress, where we're placing, the drop boxes for city services, parking, ADA accessibility.
And I absolutely agree. Like I said, I value the input that the planning board has had into city projects. And I would anticipate that any future administration would probably want to continue receiving that input in full.
So it allows.
I'm sorry, Ms. Karen?
It was just saying it allows for the input from all of the other departments as well, as well as the butters. So it gains that part of it, of the public interest. And just the site plan just coincides with, does it comply with what the ordinance and city code requirements are? So it really is just kind of an overall review to make sure it's consistent with everything else we ask of every other develop to meet the standards of the setbacks, and to also get that public input to traffic flow within the site, and anybody has concerns about that, they can bring them up.
Right, certainly. And like I said, I mean, I don't want to be misunderstood or anything. I absolutely think that it is valuable for the city to continue its current practice of submitting these things to the planning board for site plan review. Again, it's probably just a lawyer's quibble more than anything. It's simply the idea of giving any board, not the planning board specifically, but any board, any kind of authority that would enable a mandate of any sort to the city. I think that power should rest exclusively with elected officials, except where statute otherwise requires. But ultimately, I think maybe if it becomes a problem in the future, we can address it in the future. I'm okay with leaving it for now. Since since it's fairly clear that there's a consensus against the proposed change, I'm fine with leaving it. And if it ever becomes an issue in the future, we can address it then. Okay. So if there are no further comments, then in that case, I would also move that we accept that we second the recommendations of the Economic Development Committee on this segment as well.
So move.
All right, if there is no objection, that is approved by unanimous consent.
And that's all, folks.
All right, we will reconvene tomorrow night after the Economic Development Committee to address their, or rather to review the sections that they will have then reviewed at that point. I want to thank Councillor Van Hazinga for doing an excellent job of presenting all of the recommendations that we worked out, and for taking time out of his day today to talk through all of that.
Thank you, President Zarella.
And that said, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I will second that, and unless Councillor Kuchar has a great desire to stay here later,
No, please.
then we are adjourned.
Good evening.
Have a good night.
Good evening.